Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We'll kick start in a minute or two. We'll just wait for everyone to arrive. Okay, I think we're going to kick start. Welcome, everyone. My name's Holly. I'm the MD of BEMA. This is our first BEMA and audience with, so I'm quite excited. I'm looking forward to some good talk. BEMA, a lot of you, I think, maybe are BEMA members, but I know some of you don't know lots about BEMA, so I thought I'd just spend a minute or two giving you a very brief introduction. So BEMA is the UK's biggest digital community. We represent digital talent wherever it is, so across agencies, in-house teams in brands, tech companies, startups, universities, and pretty much everything in between. Everything we do is around driving innovation. So whether that's talking to students across the UK about the opportunities within the digital industry, or providing sharing and learning opportunities for people in the industry like tonight, or producing thought leadership or white papers on topics like AI or inclusion and diversity, data, blockchain, the list goes on. So if you would like to know more or get involved, we would love to have you. So do take a look at the website, or just give me a shout or any of the team a shout. I'm on holly@bema.co.uk. So before I hand over to Herb, who's going to host tonight, as I mentioned, this is our first an audience with. I just wanted to give you a heads up on what we've got coming up. So next Thursday at the same time, we have Martha Lane Fox, who is actually one of our Hall of Fame members. So she's done a few other things as well. In May, so early May, we have the amazing AI and tech philosopher Nell Watson. She was at our conference last year and just blew everyone away. I'm sure she's going to be absolutely amazing. And late May, we have the author of Be More Pirate, who no doubt will be his subversive self, Sam Conniff. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting, informative few weeks, certainly for this session. We also have a ton of other stuff going on that I won't go into now, but please do check the BEMA site for more information. So I would like to hand over to Herb. Herb Kim is a really good friend of BEMA. He's a kind of a curator extraordinaire, I would say. So he has his own conference, Thinking Digital, in Newcastle, which is I can highly recommend. He also curates TEDx in Manchester and Liverpool and Sheffield, maybe some other places too. And he was also like extremely brilliant in his curation and support of our first ever BEMA conference last year. So yeah, here's to many more conferences in our future.
Please let them return soon. Send us kids to school and let us have events and conferences again. Cool. Can I take over now, Holly? Great. Okay. Listen, everyone, first off, it's a pleasure. This is my first Zoom webinar like this, so it's an honor to be a part of it. And thank you to Holly and the BEMA crew for inviting me to be part of it. And I'm looking very much forward to what's going to be a fascinating conversation because of the person we've got featured tonight, Mr. Tom Cheesewright. I've known Tom for many years now. I don't actually know how many years, But was probably 2000. It's probably what, 8-9 years, Tom, something like that.
If not more, Herb, if not more.
If not more, yeah. And originally, when Tom was a co-founder of a Manchester e-commerce tech startup called Candy, and that's how we originally got to know each other. We had a common colleague that was one of his colleagues on the startup. And then, of course, Tom left that behind. And I was actually very impressed because he was very clear as to why he was leaving it behind. Particularly at the time, Candy was well regarded as certainly one of the leading lights in the Manchester tech scene. And his logic, as ever, and has continued to be, was just really clear as to what he was doing and why he was doing it. And obviously, as I think, if you're on this call, on this webinar, you probably know what he's gone on to do. And it's been a really pleasure to see him, start from nothing. I mean, one of my questions will be is, how do you become a futurist? I mean, how does one embark on this? I don't remember it as being in one of the career choices when I was growing up. And so it was obviously he wanted to establish this new career, went on to publish his first book, High Frequency Change, which did quite well, and it was great to see that get published. But of course, I guess proved to be the foundation of something even bigger and brighter and incredibly relevant today. Obviously, called Future Proof Your Business. Has moved up in the world. With Penguin is now your publishers, and isn't that right, Tom?
That's right. Yeah, it's
pretty nice. And I was very impressed to see that you had made the pages or the website of Business Insider as well.
Yeah, there's an old Bill Gates quote about spending your last dollar on PR. Right now, I would definitely endorse that sentiment.
Good. I'm sure if anyone's in the PR field out there, I'm sure they're very happy to hear you say that. So, I won't say any more really, other than to hand over now to Tom, who's going to be talking about obviously the thinking behind his latest book and what it means for us and for the wider world. So Tom, if I can hand over to you.
Brilliant, thanks, Herb. So let me just share this screen. I figure on these things, I'm not like Herb, I'm not a veteran of these Zoom style seminars, but I figure some slides are helpful sometimes. And what I want to talk to you today was really just outline the fundamental thinking behind the book. It's a very practical book. It's part of a series called Penguin Business Experts, which are really designed to be practical tools, quite digestible tools for people running businesses to help them address particular problems. There's a great one on project management, one on gender balancing your workplace. And this one is really about the application of futurism, which, as Herb says, futurism wasn't exactly a career that was presented to people at school, but over the last 8 years, I've become increasingly convinced that the skills of futurism are kind of critical to most business leaders now, whether you're running a small business, a micro business, or sort of global 500 company who increasingly I find myself working with. There's this set of skills that I think are absolutely critical to making a success of that business and a success over the long term, which is a theme I'll come back to. And so this book is my attempt to capture in sort of 40,000 words the skills, well, first of all, the tools that I had to develop, because when I started this business 8 years ago, what I found was the tools that were available to as a futurist, and you can go and learn futurism as a discipline at university, the tools that were available weren't really fit for purpose for the questions that my clients were asking. And again, it's a theme I'll come back to. So this book is the tools that I went on to develop to answer the questions that my clients were asking. But it's behind it is really a philosophy of business. And I wanted to spend some time talking about that first of all. If I click in the right place. I had to get a bit of Joe Wicks in here. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm constantly struggling with sore muscles at the moment because along with my wife and my kids, we're doing the PE with Joe every morning at the moment as part of our lockdown curriculum. I'm rediscovering muscles I didn't know I had. But there's something about this whole sort of lean in 15 thing which seemed really appropriate to me and really relevant to trying to explain this issue of a change in business philosophy that I think is so important. If you're a regular reader of business books, a subscriber to ideas about business practice, business theory, one thing that's been really consistent for me over at least the last 40 years, if not 60 or 80, has been this relentless focus on optimization, on efficiency. on businesses doing things better tomorrow than they did yesterday, doing fundamentally the same things, but doing them slightly better the day after in order to increase profit, increase growth, increase revenue. And that's fine up to a point. It's fine when the environment around you remains constant. It's fine when tomorrow your customers want more of what they had from you yesterday. It fails completely when a new situation comes about. Now, sometimes that's the sort of new situation I talked about in my first book, High Frequency Change, which was an attempt to explain this sense that so many of us have that change is accelerating now, and balance that against the reality that I'm sat here in a 140-year-old house and lots of stuff clearly doesn't change very quickly. And the conclusion I came to is that the nature of our hyper-connected world, both physically and digitally, the fact that a lot of the friction's been taken out of innovation and the supply chain means that new ideas, new products and services can come to market in a particular domain incredibly quickly and disrupt that domain almost overnight. And this is why we see the sort of collapse and the destruction of these enormous high street names that looked like they were city pretty, looked like they were riding high, and within 5 years, their business model has been completely turned on its head. It's not that everything's changing faster, it's that these small waves of innovation, disruptive innovation, can pass through individual industries incredibly quickly because of our hyper-connected world. And so originally I started arguing for organizations that they should shift away from this focus on efficiency because of these small waves of change. Of course, in the situation we're in now, when this enormous wave of change, this tsunami of change has crashed over all of us, suddenly that lesson just seems to be amplified. It seems all the more relevant. Because if you spent 40 years, 20 years, 30 years, 10 years focused on continuous process optimization, or focused on revenue growth, or focused on cutting costs and being lean and lean and lean, your ability to respond to that disruption, whether it is really narrow in your individual industry or whether it is industry-wide, worldwide, is really limited. And I think we've seen this in the public sector, the difficulty that we've had responding to this challenge because of the lack of overhead, the lack of flexibility in the system that has been stripped away by this relentless focus on efficiency and low costs. And I think it's been really evident in business as well, that so many businesses have been so ultra focused on optimizing for business as it is today and just eking out that bit of extra profit, cutting away that little bit of extra cost. They've not had the ability, the bandwidth to respond at speed to the challenge that's come. And that, I think, is why Penguin decided to bring the launch of this book forward for 3 months. It wasn't really meant to launch until July. But that point about that philosophy of being focused on adaptation, not optimization, and building your business with that in mind, the possibility of disruption and preparing for it, is really at the heart of this book. And I think it's why it feels so relevant right now. So I think focused on 40 years, making everything lean, I think now is the time for a shift in our fundamental business philosophy. Now is the time that we absolutely have to be thinking about adaptation and building our businesses to adapt rather than be continuously optimal. And the book really follows from there as 3 different ways of doing that. I'm going to talk about those now. The first one, and I'll skip back because I've kind of said it, is about do you know what? Let's come back to that slide. I describe these 3 tools as all part of being an athletic business. And it's, what I mean by that is there are some fundamental traits that great athletes have that differentiate us, certainly from me and from most of us, as my soreness doing Joe Wicks illustrates. The first thing when you watch a great athlete at work is that they clearly have this ability to sense what's going on around them much better than we do. They have both that strategic sense to read the game and know what's happening, make that killer pass with barely looking up, but also that immediate sort of proprioception for what's going on around them. They can sense the runner on their shoulder. They can sense the car behind them on the track. And so, future-ready businesses have to develop these sort of abilities, these enhanced senses. The next thing those athletes have is the ability to process and decide. They take that information really, really quickly, process it, and make a decision. And again, it's something I notice working with clients that companies are generally really, really bad at. And the third thing that these clients have, the third thing that companies need to have, future-ready companies need to have, is this ability to work as a network, to effectively shape their body like an athlete does for the challenge in front of them. And I think most of our companies, most of our organizations are kind of out of shape for the sport, for the discipline we're facing. They're sort of like 70s football players trying to compete in the Premier League these days. And so, as I say, there's 3 tools to address each one of these different things. The first one is about how we look at the future. And as I said at the start, when I came into the discipline of futurism full-time 8 years ago, the first thing I realized was that most of the tools of futurism are really about looking 20, 30 years ahead. They're tools that take quite a long time to process through, things like scenario planning. They take quite a lot of human investment, human resource to go through. They're really brilliant tools. They're really useful for doing that sort of scanning of the distant horizon. But they're absolutely terrible about telling you what threats and opportunities might appear on the near horizon and utterly disrupt your business tomorrow. And so the first thing I did in this business was build a tool that said, okay, in a sensible amount of time, how can I scan the near horizon and see what threats and opportunities are coming up that are going to really dramatically affect my clients? Because that's the question they're asking. Not, are we going to have jetpacks in 25 years, but what's going to take me out of the knees in the next 5 years because I don't want to be another Blockbuster, another Kodak, etc. And the conclusion I came to, the process I came to, it said, look, most of the big change that's happening in these organizations usually starts at sort of faults, cracks already in the organization, at pressure points that are already visible. There's already issues around cost in the supply chain if it was physical music. There's already issues in the amount of friction in film cameras if it's Kodak. So if we can find these pressure points, we can probably work out where the change is going to come. And then we've got to decide what's going to trigger it. And the way we do that is we look at the macro trends, the trends that are touching every aspect of every organization around the world. And all we've got to do is work out where those macro trends coming in from one side collide with the pressure points that are already there. And so I built this very simple process. I said, look, here's 5 trends that largely encapsulate everything I've seen across all the disciplines I've worked in, whether I'm working in supermarkets or super yachts, whether I'm working with sort of global 500 retailer or a bank or a charity or a bit of government. I keep seeing the same 5 trends over and over again. So get your head around these 5 trends and then use these tools to go and understand the pressure points in your business. And those tools are really simple. It's go and talk to your people, go and talk to your peers, go and do a deep dive at every level of your organization, understand what's going on and what's causing problems. Bring that together and mash those 2 up and say, look, I can see this trend coming in from over here. I can see this pressure point. And clearly that trend for rising automation is going to affect this fact that I've got a massive overhead in terms of manual processing right now. There's something we can do about that. And what I found over time, and again, we built this tool probably 5-6 years ago, is it's a really good way of getting your thought process around what's happening, seeing what's on the near horizon, and starting to come to conclusions about what you do. And I try and get people to limit it just to 5 things that they can focus on in the next 6 months. And it only takes a day. It's a day every 6 months you devote to looking at the future. The second tool that's really important is about accelerating decisions. Like, most companies I come across are really, really bad at deciding what to do. And they're bad at it for 2 reasons. The first reason is that information moves really slowly through the organization. I had one client once where it took 12 weeks for information to get from the customer to a decision maker and back again when we measured it. Now, most people aren't that bad, but we still have a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of fear, a lot of poorly built systems. So information moves really, really slowly. And the obvious thing to do is, right, fix the systems, fix the processes, devote some time in the business to make things move more quickly, invest in some software. And that's all good. That's really good. But there's something much, much simpler that organizations can do. And it's a real British disease in many ways, is we centralize everything. We keep all the power at the core. And actually small business owners, and I've been there, are really guilty of this as well. We want everything to be our decision, our control. We're very bad at delegating quite often. If you push power to the edge of the organization and give people the autonomy and the responsibility and the skills and the training to go and take those decisions for themselves, you could not possibly be more responsive. And I used an example in my first book of Lidl and One Direction Easter eggs to explain this. They'd rolled out One Direction Easter eggs to the shelves just before, and I'm sorry if this is triggering, Zayn left the band, and suddenly their Easter eggs, not necessarily worthless, but certainly worth something very, very different. And the response to that in the space of 20 minutes was for their social media marketer to talk to their merchandising person, both people in their early 20s, and make a massive economic decision, financial decision, to drop the price of those Easter eggs by 20%, because 20% of the band had left, to the enormous social media success. So push power to the edge of the organization. It's the cheapest, albeit not free, thing you can do to really accelerate decisions in your organization. The third thing you can do, and it's why I wanted to come back to that slide of the 2 Audis, is about the shape of the organization. And something that's happened alongside that desire to be hyper efficient, to keep things really, really slick, to be optimized for the business model we have today, is that we've both centralized and made our organizations quite monolithic. And that just doesn't work in an age where you've got to adapt rapidly. If your organization is built in a single package, and I'll come back to this as it's a great illustration of it. If your organization is constructed like this die-cast Audi Quattro, this is the slide I actually built for Audi. If your organization is built like this die-cast Audi Quattro, and you give that toy to a kid at Christmas, you give them a die-cast toy car, the chances are they're going to love it and treasure it and play with it for somewhere between an hour and a week, and if you're really lucky, a month. Because there's no flexibility in that toy car. It can't be anything else. It's perfectly optimized as a model of the Audi Quattro. It looks just like it in miniature, but it's got no adaptability unless you're willing to get out the angle grinder and some super glue, which I confess as a kid I used to do. Compare that to the Lego Audi Quattro. It's not efficient. It's not a perfectly optimized model of the Audi Quattro. But when the kid gets bored of it after an hour, a week, a month, they can rip it to pieces and turn it into a dragon or a dinosaur, an aeroplane or a unicorn, or whatever they want it to be. And what I'm seeing increasingly is that really smart organizations, really future-ready organizations, the ones who got their heads around this early, and said, actually, we don't want to build ourselves as a monolith. We don't want to be this hyper-optimized organization for the business we're in today. We're willing to take some overhead. We're willing to accept some costs to ensure that we are agile and adaptable, and we can break our organization down into these Lego bricks and rebuild it to meet new challenges. And what that looks like is literally breaking the organization down into functional units to say, you're really good at this, you're really good at this, you're really good at this, and understanding the interfaces between those functional units. And then coming back to my second sort of tool, giving them some level of autonomy. If you've got a really good finance team, why should they just be your finance team? If you've got a really good dev team, why should they just be your dev team? Really good designers, why are they only designing for you? And actually allowing these different bits of the organization to operate in a much more sort of networked fashion. And the company that really got their heads around this early was Amazon. Rewind 16 years now, and Jeff Bezos sends out a memo to everybody in the organization, which, and I'm paraphrasing here, basically says stop talking to each other. It says break our organization down into these functional units, wrap every unit in a layer of software that allows me to have sort of transparent access to what goes on inside it, and that information to move between us, and equally between us and people outside the organization in the same sort of way. And what that did was break Amazon down into Lego bricks, and it's Lego bricks that other people come and play with. And that is the origin of Amazon Web Services, where when you take that function of Amazon, its web hosting function effectively, wrap it in that layer of software and give it that, excuse me, that sort of transparent access to other people, then, other people can come and play with your Lego bricks and build their own things out of it. And that creates not necessarily the most profitable business, and Amazon was beaten up for a long time for not being as profitable as it should be, but absolutely the most resilient, the most adaptable business. So yeah, so that was a very, very rapid run through those sort of 3 critical things. And I think come back to where I started. The most important thing about this book for me is that change in philosophy. I really want people to get their heads around the tools, be able to use the tools, but I don't think they're really valuable until you get that change in philosophy that I think is required now. It's required in the age of pandemics, and this may not be the last one. This one may not go away very fast. It's required in this sort of age of sweeping changes, where after this, sorry to depress everybody on a Thursday night, but we may be facing rapid changes of climate. We may be facing rapid change in all sorts of other ways. We need this ability to adapt much more than we need to be absolutely optimized. And in many ways, actually being optimized is now a weakness rather than a strength. The better optimized you are for your particular business as it is today, the harder you're going to find it to translate your practices to the business world of tomorrow. And once you've got your head around that, once you've embedded that sort of philosophy in the organization, then it's really about developing these skills and these tools. First of all, about foresight. How do we see what's coming? How do we scan the near horizon? How do we at least get 2, 3 months, 6 months notice, ideally, of what's coming, rather than none at all and be blindsided by it? Once we've seen that information, once we've gathered that foresight and pulled it in, How do we then translate that into action? How do we accelerate our speed of response and our decision making, both in an operational sense, just rapid response to customer needs, but also in a strategic sense? How do we pull that information in, steer the business appropriately? And thirdly, actually, how do we structure the organization? How do we train it and get it in shape so that those things are easier? So that rather than being this monolith, this sort of hyper-optimized Audi Quattro perfect for the business we're in today, how do we ensure that we've got that bandwidth and that flexibility by breaking our organization down into these functional units so that when the new challenge comes, we can rapidly reassemble, rapidly adapt to face that new challenge? And yeah, it's all in the book, which we'll find so far only on Amazon Kindle. The print launch is still scheduled for July the 30th. But yeah, if you're a Kindle person, it's there. Herb, questions?
Great. Thank you for unmuting me, Tom. And thank you so much for that thought-provoking presentation. What an incredible time for the book. And during this time of obviously great upheaval and crisis, there are folks like, say, Amazon, who've obviously mentioned, most of the major digital players who are being seen as Zoom, obviously, since we're on it constantly now. And I'm beginning to wonder, though, I wonder if Tom Cheesewright in your book is also one of the major beneficiaries of the global pandemic. And the reason I say that, jokes aside, is because it strikes me that, I mean, to some extent, a lot of the things that you've talked about with regard to like sacrificing some optimization for adaptability and flexibility and forward thinking, like even 4 months ago, you would almost be shouting into the wind for a lot of people. They'd just be like, yeah. And now suddenly everyone's, even if they're a winner out of this, they've had a massive kick in the head, if you will, psychologically. And now suddenly, like, wow. I mean, sorry, Tom, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because what I've noticed with the whole coronavirus thing is there's very little that's new that's come out of it. But what it's done is it's accelerated a load of existing trends. People were already moving to more flexible work. People were already making more use of sort of video chat, video calling. People were already starting to think about, have I got this right? And particularly in the larger companies, where I was going and having conversations at very, very senior levels, they're saying, my philosophy is having to change. A great example, it's one from the book. I did some work with BMW. BMW, as you'd expect from a big company like that, spends a lot of money on leadership training and development training. And it's the second wave of its current sort of leadership development program is explicitly about what it calls ambidextrous thinking, ambidextrous leadership. The acknowledgement that actually, do you know what, BMW's built its success on continuous process optimization. All done for the last 60, 100 years has just been better next year than what we did last year. And we now know it's not enough. We now know that's not going to define the success of BMW. So what we've got to do is teach all our people who are embedded in this philosophy of continuous process optimization, we've got to teach them innovation and entrepreneurship and creativity and all of these skills that they didn't have before. So I think it wasn't exactly shouting into the wind, but there were pockets of acceptance and people who'd started to buy into it. Mostly those industries that saw rapid change coming, as BMW does with Tesla, with Geely, with lots of the big Chinese electric car manufacturers coming in. But it was there. But you're absolutely right. The coming of this pandemic has completely opened people's minds to that thinking, to a much greater extent.
Yeah, although it's funny because I mean it's interesting because obviously you'll remember 9/11, which at the time seemed like an event that would be unprecedented in its impact and its scale and et cetera, which of course it was massive, obviously. Then we had the global financial crisis, which in many ways dwarfed 9/11 in terms of the overall impact on governments and financial services and people's lives. And now, of course, we have COVID, where it's like, it makes us miss the days of the financial crisis. Thinking, could we go back to those quaint times of, stock market crashes and quantitative easing? I guess, I mean, the one natural question has got to be, and maybe you've asked this before, it seems like we think, oh, this is the biggest thing that happened in a generation, except now we say that every 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is there something, I mean, is this something that we should just be expecting, that like, this is, unfortunately, in another 10, 12, whatever number of years, there's going to be something else coming down the line, whether it be climate change, global terrorism, and I guess, I mean, especially if you're working with the likes of Audi and BMW, who've got the kind of capacity to have that kind of forward. I mean, how do you even begin to think, and how do, I guess, if you will, smaller entities, try to, or is it even worth kind of trying to figure out what the next big thing is going to be, if you will, that comes shock the world?
I think there's lots of answers to that. One of them is about, one of the big trends that I track is this explosion of choice. So the same factors that allow this rapid spread of memes, ideas, products, services around the world also create an explosion of choice.
Mm-hmm.
There's just more stuff. There's just more competition at every layer of the value chain now. And
Mm-hmm.
so, increasingly, it's not about what is the next big thing. It's, can we latch onto one of the 10 next big things, because we know no one's going to capture all the market. And sure, there's, the superstars that break out of that capturing a portion of the market are so few and far between. They're so unpredictable. That actually what we really want to do is say, look, there's clearly a market here. We can latch onto a portion of that. Maybe we can latch onto 2 or 3 of these opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
because the cost of doing so has fallen as well. It's not like there's a stat I looked up for the last book. It's like, it used to take 5 to 7 years to develop a new car, and it's now under 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of actually building a proposition for a particular domain is much, much lower than it used to be. So we can afford to have a few bets. Mm-hmm. We can afford to say, okay, we'll capture that domain, that demographic, that one, but maybe not try and latch onto the big thing, or even actually try not to be the people necessarily who define what the next big thing is. I mean, that might be the Apple lesson. Mm-hmm. Come to it late and do it better. Mm-hmm. But there's also that thing about, we can't, right? The other thing you learn with futurism is, like, I used to be hugely optimistic about the speed of change, right? And I did a blog post recently about all the things I've got wrong, mm-hmm. And I've usually been too optimistic about how fast things are going to come. And mm-hmm. I've learned my lesson now. We go through like the financial crisis, we go through this pandemic, and we expect the world's going to look completely different afterwards, and actually it doesn't. It snaps back to a very fairly close facsimile of what it was before. And so, the lesson is about being able to weather these things and creating that resilience so that you can get through, survive long enough to see what's next and build again, rather than being able to predict them and be absolutely prepared. It's about the reason for adaptability is building that resilience, because you're not always going to see everything.
Of course not. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I mean, it seems so much about this is around building a culture, if you will, that values these things. And it's been fascinating. I mean, since we've talked a lot about Corona, but I mean, another thing that's been fascinating out of it is seeing, of course, the different countries, and your discussion about power at the core versus the edge was fascinating to me. And it was interesting to me was, of course, in America under Trump, one thing I guess you see is that it's very unclear as to where the power is, and it's a kind of classic situation where I guess the core doesn't want to necessarily give away all its power, but it definitely wants to give away accountability and responsibility, which you do see that a lot in organizations, small and large, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely, and that it's really refreshing when you see someone who genuinely wants to give the power away. Who genuinely wants to empower people with, like I say, it's that 2x2 access, right? A really terrible job is one where you've got no autonomy and no responsibility. Or possibly even worse is responsibility but no autonomy, or vice versa. Your autonomy but no responsibility. No responsibility, you're just bored. Responsibility, no autonomy, you're just you're hanging out in the wind. You need both.
Yeah.
And if you've got people who are willing to give that and invest in the skills, the rules, the support mechanisms around people to create that, the power of it is incredible. I mean, you're going to scare people at the front lines. You're going to put them in difficult situations, but the reward for them and the personal development for them is much, much greater.
Well, I mean, again, I mean, I have a feeling that when we look back on this current period of pandemic crisis, that, I mean, obviously other countries, New Zealand and others have been pointed to as success stories. I mean, South Korea seems to have done a reasonably good job of responding to what was initially a very bad start for them. I guess partially by pushing out some of this power and information to the edges. And I wonder, not to make this entire pandemic a promotion for your book, but but I
didn't organize it.
No, I accept that. I'm not suggesting that. But I mean, it will be fascinating because it just seems that I mean, as you can probably expect from the nature of the work that I do, I completely buy into the basic tenets of your book, but how much of what you're talking about really is cultural and political, right? You know, building up the political will within companies, and this doesn't have to. It can be a 5-person company. It doesn't have to be a country, right? You know, to not just be a slave to optimization, you know, and to be able to be flexible and adaptable and to look forward.
Oh, it's really hard. I mean, you know, and it's hard in different size companies for different reasons. So you're in a big listed company, it's about a difficult conversations with shareholders quite often. You know, and that conversation's, you know, starting to happen because you're getting, you know, chief executive listed company typically lasts 5 years, you know, and they're coming in and they used to come in and go, right, you know, I've got 5 years, I can, you know, cut a bit here, grow a bit here, you know, I can nail 4 quarters of solid growth, and I'm going to leave, you know, in 5 years time, you know, with my head held high, having grown the business. And now they're coming in and looking at it and going, I don't think I can get through 5 years without something utterly disrupting whatever plans we had. So their first conversation with the shareholders is not, yeah, I'm your guy for 5 years of growth. It's, I'm your, you know, I'm the person who's going to set you up for sustainable success for the next 20 years. And we're going to change the culture of the organization, the behavior of the organization to do that. You know, sometimes that's about ethics. It's about, you know, we've got to ensure that our customers are on board in 20 years, so we can't have another PPI scandal.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about their people. You know, we need a lot more digital skills. We've looked at the market. We can't recruit these people, so we've got to do massive investment in training and development.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about supply chain. You know, climate change is coming down the pipeline. Half our suppliers are going to get wiped out unless we do something. We need to invest in our supply chain and supporting them and be a bit more responsible towards the planet. You bring that down to the much smaller scale of organization, and it's in a lot of ways it's about time. And particularly the smallest organizations, it's about how can I release, you know, I am the business. If I founded the business, you know, right up to 100 people sometimes, the founder is the business. How can I release the time? How can I let go of that control which has got me to where we are today? How can I, you know, release my sort of clawed hands away from those levers of control?
Yeah.
And let other people do it. How can I relax enough to do that? How can I find the time to devote to looking forward? And that's really challenging.
Well, you mentioned, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned BMW's investment into leadership development. Another thing is, I mean, a number of the sort of the top sort of startup venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, Y Combinator and others, they put a significant investment, companies that are startup founders at a very young stage, and ultimately into personal development, because of and we've talked a lot about culture, you know, but ultimately culture is about behavior and about how you interpret the world, and your willingness to share power and information to achieve a much bigger goal, and things like that. And I just wonder, like, I mean, is BMW an example of a company that is kind of seeing some success through its leadership development to try and maybe break some of this decades-old formula for success? I mean, obviously they've been massively successful and seem to be a very innovative company at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, you know, this program started last year. We'll have to wait to see the results of that. Yeah, but there's the ambition there. There's the recognition there, and I think, you know, I'm starting to see that in more and more of the big sort of global 500 scale companies, that, you know, tomorrow is not like today, and we've got to start now in order to be the organization we need to be in the future. And you know, that has lots of these components, but you know, most of these cases, most of the companies I'm working with, it's still ambition. Like, it's not realized yet. because turning around, whether it's true again, it's true of a small company, a large company, changing culture, changing behavior is a slow process. It's a challenging process. It's a difficult process, and sometimes it requires very much personal development from individuals in power. Sometimes it requires a really big culture shift across the organization. Bear in mind, places like BMW or actually lots of my clients, you go in and you say, how long have people been here? And you find out the average tenure is somewhere between 7 and 14, 20 years. People who are embedded in that culture, the culture is them and they are the culture. And asking them to change that now is really, really difficult. So it takes a lot of time, hopefully time they all have.
Yeah, it's not, I guess it's not unlike in the military, which is famous for always fighting the last war, right? Until basically, if you will, COVID-like crisis comes and suddenly carriers suddenly start destroying battleships and so on and so forth. And it's interesting as well. I mean, in the digital agency world, and you have organizations like Hyper Island in Sweden and Form over between Liverpool and Manchester, who really are basically doing a leadership development, as far as I can tell.
Hyper Island in Manchester as well. I've done various bits with them on that subject, and it's but we all need it. I mean, I before we did Candy, I was running a digital agency, and it's trying to keep up with what's next, like trying to keep your eyes on what's next, because there's so many incremental changes that you have to keep up with, about the latest Google update or the latest the WordPress update or the latest whatever it may be, the latest version of Node.js, whatever it may be. Whereas, and then there's the snapping out of that and doing the big picture vision. One thing I've been talking to digital agencies about for years is going from the screen to the physical environment, which I think is an enormous opportunity now that the level of technology comprehension and coding skills are very, very similar between building for the web and building for the world. Making some companies have made that shift, and where they've gone is fascinating. But it's very hard to get your head out of day to day.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely. I mean, I think I actually put at least some of the success of TED and TED Talks and the TED conference to this kind of, if you will, global focus on optimization and efficiency. And there's actually an inherent human desire to occasionally have the moment to zoom out, to like look at the bigger picture. And TED gives you a little 15-minute snippet of that. So even if your company's not doing it, even if you're not getting it in your life, at least you can kind of, if you will, zoom out into a TED Talk and get a slice of that, that kind of, that sort of brain food. So
one of the growing areas of my business has been big corporations basically trying to run their own TED Talks internally.
Nice.
Kellogg's called it, Kellogg's had their KED Talks.
Very original.
But you're starting to see that now, where we can't just, it's not just the leadership who needs this opportunity. We need to get it out to everybody across the business, because everybody's going to be part of this shift.
Okay, so outside of reading your book, outside of watching a few TED Talks, what are some of the things that you're advising your clients that they can do, whether it be at a personal level or at an organizational level, to kind of further themselves down this journey?
My favorite one from a personal level, and it comes from personal experience, is go and get a new hobby. So particularly when you get to sort of when you've been in an industry 10, 20 years, you know it inside out, you know all the people, you feel like you finally start to feel like you may be good at your job sometimes, and you forget just how much you don't know, and you forget, you let the learning muscles atrophy a little bit. And I tell people to go and get a new hobby, and for me it was learning to roller skate. My kids got me into roller skating about 4 years ago. And all of a sudden I'm surrounded by 7-year-olds who know a lot more than I do. I'm bouncing off the floor on a regular basis, utterly humiliated. And suddenly you're humble again. Your learning muscles, particularly doing something physical, your learning muscles are reawakened through fear and pain. But you're also doing some other interesting stuff, which is really important for personal development. You're communicating with a new group of people, a completely new audience, completely differently, with different views. And you're getting creative. People forget about creativity just being really trying and failing. And that's what you do when you learn a new hobby. So the single single biggest simple piece of advice to people is go and get a new hobby, go and try something new and fail at it for a little bit until it reawakens those learning muscles. From an organizational perspective, you know, planning, like most organizations are dreadful at planning. I did some research with a Canadian software company called Profix a while back, and we found that in 2/3 of mid-sized companies, the budget and the annual strategy bear little or no relation to each other. Like the one planning exercise we all do, the budget, and it does, you know, in 2/3 of cases, it does nothing to support the direction we're actually trying to travel.
Right.
Like even if it, you know, pains you, force yourselves to spend more time, not just 15 minutes watching a TED talk, one day every 6 months, 1% of your time outside of the business, focused on the future, and use a formal discipline to do it. Like you don't even need to read the book. It's only 5 at the moment, but you know, go and like find your pressure points, talk to everybody in the business, talk to your customers, talk to your partners, find out what you do badly, find out what causes you pain, look at those big trends, go and look at what's coming in, go and read the papers, go and read the analyst reports, find out, you know, go and listen to other people from Beamer, find out what the big trends are coming in, look at where those two collide with each other, pick 5 things, fix them, do it again in 6 months' time.
Interesting. So two questions off the bat, or just 2 observations really. First of all is with regard to your first point about the personal development side, about finding a new hobby. We just hosted a talk by a guy named David Epstein at TEDx Manchester. It was literally the last event before the pandemic sort of shut
The author
everything.
of Range.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Just up there. Yeah.
How convenient. And he basically, well, you probably read the book, but he in this talk he effectively takes a pop at the whole 10,000 hours concept, right? As being in a few instances it works if you have basically a tightly controlled environment that doesn't change. So like golf, for example, right?
Yeah.
But most of life, of course, isn't a golf course, right? You know, it's a hell of a lot less predictable and stable. And in that instance, effectively being a generalist is for the long term, your chances of long-term success are a lot higher being a generalist with multiple effectively talents and interests and abilities, so that you're not so invested in one effectively very vertical area which you can dominate, because eventually, obviously, you'll be shifted out of that vertical and into a scary new world, if you will, you know. So I thought that was certainly a very
yeah. I mean, it connects a lot with the most common question I'm asked after where's my jetpack, which and do you have a crystal ball, and what's next week's lottery numbers, is what should I be teaching my kids? And it comes back to what I was saying about that hobby. You know, those 3 skills I was talking about: the ability to discover and qualify information, right? To curate effectively, to do what you do, to communicate, and to create. If you can learn, if you can make stuff, if you can sell those ideas, you know, if you've got those 3 skills, you're kind of set for life. Which domains you learn those 3 skills in kind of doesn't matter. You know, it's why I get so cross every time someone talks about the knowledge economy. Like knowledge is cheap and accessible; it's everywhere. The ability to do something with that knowledge is what's rare.
Well, I think it's I'm being asked to close here, but I mean that observation you just made reminds me of another book by Carol Dweck, Mindset. I'm sure you've come across Growth Mindset, and about how effectively important the value in terms of emphasizing the process of learning and the flexibility to learn as a cultural thing versus focusing on results, which is the thing that will kill it. Of course, short term, it of course yields more results better, but long term, it probably isn't something that's going to work. So listen, Tom, I wish we could go on. Fascinating. I feel like it was just barely started, but I'm getting hand signals from Holly and Alice telling me, please. So once again, I look forward to your book, and it's great that Penguin has accelerated its release, and I hope it does great.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much to both of you. It's okay, because Tom is going to be on our Twitter at Beamer tomorrow at 3:30, aren't you, Tom? 3:30 p.m. Be weird if it was the morning. So if you do have questions, I'm sure you do, please join, and he's there for a good half an hour, I think. So yeah, we'll look forward to that. Otherwise, this session is available on our YouTube channel. And yeah, please come back again. Come and join us again for the ton of other stuff we've got going on over the next few weeks. Thanks again, both of you, and everyone have a great evening, and yeah, go and have a glass of something.